TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. This is the award-winning program that never runs out of material. This week in Jihad, and this week our very special guest is none other than David Wood, who has explicitly given me permission to use the TikTok time to rock intro. David, thank you for being here yet again. There is quite a lot of Jihad before us, and so I think that in light of all our many technical difficulties last week, we should, without further delay, dive right into it. And what we have first off is a very curious incident in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It does not involve meth. It involves 4 Muslims who were murdered over the last few months, actually going back to last November. And this has been a very big deal. The Council on American Islamic Relations, that most trustworthy of organizations, has offered a $10,000, actually they offered, I should say, in the past tense, a $10,000 reward for information about the killer. And none other than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have both given condemnations of this hate crime, or these 4 hate crimes, actually. But then there was a bit of a fly in the ointment, or a spanner in the works, as they would say in London. The killer, or the suspect, was caught, and his name? What do you think his name is, David?
I gotta go with Muhammad.
I don't know how you do it.
I don't actually want to laugh at this situation because it is messed up that this guy was going on.
Indeed,
he's a serial killer, but it is it is funny how predictable a lot of this stuff is.
Yes, Mohammed Syed, an Afghan Muslim migrant, and as it turns out, all 4 of his victims were Shiites, and Mohammed Syed is a Sunni. Now, let me ask you, David, what do you think the chances are that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to issue any statements about the Sunni Shiite jihad coming to the United States?
No, and that's the real. I mean, we've seen the hypocrisy for what? Since 9/11, at least, that we can trace this back, where anything that can be associated with you, for instance, right? Even if there's no actual connection, it's just someone gets killed. A Muslim gets killed. It's somehow your fault. Even if the person has no connection with you whatsoever, totally different ideology, it's somehow your fault, or it's my fault. And this has been going on forever. We've never advocated violence. We've never advocated killing. And just to be clear, you can have a person who hates Muslims so much that he goes around killing Muslims. Guess what? You didn't get that from us. We condemn that. One of the main reasons we criticize Islam so much is because of the violence. It would make sense if we were advocating violence as a response to the violence, or if we said, "Hey, go on a killing spree to stop the killing sprees." But my goodness, it never stops. In that, just a few days ago, I heard about the guy. I heard about someone who may be targeting Muslims. It was unclear if this was a pattern, or if these were just 4 random killings, all of whom happened to be Muslim. And you have to think at that point, hey, there could actually be someone who decided to go kill a bunch of Muslims. You had the guy, down in New Zealand who did that. So it could be that. But at the same time, you're thinking, it's a little more common. It would be a little more common for some inter-Islamic violence, right? So it's like, you had 9/11 attacks and the 7/7 bombings. You had all these killings and so on. Occasionally, you have like an Anders Breivik or something like that. Occasionally, you have a Timothy McVeigh or something like that. You can have other people who were doing terrorist attacks. Well, similarly, you can have You could have someone who hates Muslims going out and killing Muslims, or you can have someone from a different sect of Islam going around killing Muslims. And it just seems like that's a bit more common than the anti-Muslim backlash. And it's just amazing that if the news had just come out that this was some Islamophobic bigot who started killing Muslims, everyone in the government, everyone in the media, everyone everywhere would say, we have to get to the bottom of this Islamophobia. This is why we need even more UN resolutions and even more laws. And this is why social media platforms need to crack down on criticism of Islam even more. So it would be, we have to investigate the ideologies that led to this. We have to silence these ideologies. We have to silence all critics of Islam. We have to take steps every day to combat whatever caused this violence against Muslims. But then the moment you find out, nope, it's actually Sunni on Shia violence, then all of a sudden it all stops. It all stops. You don't need to investigate the ideology. You don't need to take any sort of steps to combat the source of this violence. You don't need to do any of that. When it's just amazing. This comes from the Quran. Right? It's Surah 9, verse 73. Wage jihad not only against unbelievers, but also against hypocrites. You don't just wage jihad against non-Muslims. You wage jihad against people who claim to be Muslims, but are somehow off in their doctrine or practice. And so this is a command of the Quran. And so if you wanted to be consistent and say, hey, we need to look into this, we need to get to the bottom of this, well, you'd have to start criticizing Islam there. And so they can't do that. So they just have to drop it. And so it's this weird situation where if you don't advocate violence, like us, if you don't advocate violence, we don't advocate violence. We condemn people who would go out and start killing Muslims. Then for some reason, if someone doesn't listen to us and then goes on a killing spree, we're responsible, even though we condemn the violence. But if you're the Quran or the preachers who preach it, if you're the Sunni preachers who preach and call for violence against Shia Muslims, you get a free pass. You get a free pass. You're not responsible. Even if you call for the violence, promote the violence, inspire the violence, incite the violence, and someone goes out and commits the violence based on what you've taught them, you're totally exempt, free from criticism. And it's just, I mean, here again, if you were to make a movie about all of this and say that there's some world where it's this bad, it's this ridiculous, it's this hypocritical, you couldn't even believe the movie. The movie would be unbelievable. People can't be that stupid. You can't. Journalists and politicians, they can't be that insane and biased to where someone who's saying, "Guys, stop the violence, stop the violence," they're responsible for the violence, and people over here going, "Kill, slaughter the unbeliever, slaughter the hypocrite." They're totally free from blame. Like you couldn't. The world would be unbelievable, and yet here we are.
It also has to be noted, of course, that the Sunni Shiite Jihad is 1,400 years old, and there are untold numbers of victims, not only historically, but also in our own day. There is ongoing violence. As a matter of fact, one of the stories I have queued up here today is about 2 Shiites who were murdered by Sunnis in Pakistan this week. And how many people were killed in Islamophobic attacks? The number is 0, and it should always be 0. And there is no justification for murder under any circumstances of anyone. But the idea of international commissions about Islamophobia and the President of the United States and the Vice President condemning this as an Islamophobic attack when they say nothing about the Sunni Shiite Jihad that actually does kill people, it indicates that this is all agenda-driven and not reality-driven. And it doesn't have anything to do with the way things really are. It has to do with the way things that various powers in the world today want them to be.
And it's important that you're pointing out that this goes back 14 centuries, because people who don't know the history and think that this is some modern modern development or something like that. I mean, Aisha, the mother of the faithful, that's her title in Islam, Aisha, the mother of the faithful, marched an army against Ali, whose title was the commander of the faithful. And thousands of Muslims died in bloody combat. Muslims on both sides of that battle had been companions of Muhammad who fought alongside Muhammad at the Battle of Badr and Uhud and the Battle of the Trench. Now they were killing each other over a disagreement about how Ali handled the people who'd killed Uthman. And so the solution, hey, we have a disagreement here. We have a disagreement about how you handled something. What do we need to do? We need to start slaughtering each other. Where did they get this idea that you settle your disagreements by starting to slaughter each other? These were the people who learned Islam from Muhammad himself. And just instantly they start accusing people of being unbelievers or hypocrites or something like that. And hey, now we have to kill you. And so that's why this is so important. That first generation of Muslims. That first generation of Muslims was so violent, it almost completely wiped itself out by slaughtering each other. If it had been like 2% more violent, they would have completely annihilated it. It would have annihilated itself. So there's that. But here's the toughest pill to swallow for our Muslim friends. Muhammad was asked, what's the best generation of Muslims? And he said that first generation of Muslims was the best generation of Muslims, and that later generations of Muslims would be progressively worse. And so you look at that and you say, wait, the generation of Muslims that Muhammad himself identified as the best generation of Muslims, the generation that all subsequent generations should look up to as the greatest generation, almost annihilated itself by killing and slaughtering each other. And then one Sunni guy goes and kills a couple of Shias, and people can't figure it out. And so let's just sweep it under the rug. And it wasn't an Islamophobe, so we can't understand it. And so let's just ignore it.
Indeed. David, a couple people here are saying that you're low, your microphone. I don't see anything I can do about that. Is there something I can do about it?
You have audio controls on your mic, but it's good because last week they were saying you were too low. So It's good that I'm too low this time. But yeah, where you see the bars, where you see the audio levels,
I see the bar.
There should be a control underneath it that allows you to increase. You don't see it?
I'm sorry, no.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a sort of screen share because when I use the same program, I see it. So I don't know if there's something we have to click on to get that option. But let me go into system preferences here. And
some people are saying you sound fine, and I don't want to take up the whole show with technical difficulties like last week. But many people are saying it's good, so maybe that's good enough. I got quite a story here. What do you think? Should we move on or no?
Let me. It's good to always pause if there's a technical. People are saying it's good.
Yeah, many people are saying it's okay.
Okay. We'll just ignore it then. So it can't be too bad.
Okay.
All right.
I got a very bizarre story out of Germany. This is not, one of the things that is a difficulty with a show like this, or with this show, is that the news is the same every week. Some people get killed, some daughters get murdered, some Sunnis or Shiites get killed. There's a tremendous sameness. That's absolutely true. Let's just put that here. Mr. Spencer will make it worse. Leave well enough alone. There's no doubt about that. Thank you for that. Anyway, it's just like a Jihad Watch. I can understand why people reading Jihad Watch over the years would think, well, this is all the same, because jihad activity falls into some very specific categories, and it generally doesn't vary. And so there is a tremendous sameness to it. The names change, the cities change, the incidents are the same. Some guys stabbing people at random on the street, that's a very common one in Europe these days. Somebody gets beheaded, somebody shouts. What do they shout, David? It's always the same.
Allahu Akbar. Oh,
There
little
you go.
side note. Little side note for the people saying this mic. I'm not talking through this mic. I'm talking through this Rode mic. So quit telling me to. David, your mic is pointing up. It's pointing up. I'm not using that. This one is not pointing up.
Okay. Now this story, though, I got a story here that is unlike any story that I've ever seen in 20 years of Jihad Watch, and certainly unlike any story we have discussed here. On August 11th, last year, so it's almost a year ago.
Yeah, I thought you were about to be a prophet or something.
Yes. Where's my 9-year-old bride? Anyway, sorry, no, I have no interest in such things. I want to make that absolutely clear.
I was gonna have to dissociate for.
No, I was quoting Muhammad there. Anyway, on August 11th, 2021, shortly before midnight, a 40-year-old man in Berlin, Thomas K., who, as is the practice in the German papers, they didn't give his last name, and they're arguing in a park in Charlottenburg in Berlin because his daughter came home. She was 12 years old, and he saw her coming home from soccer practice, and she was strolling out of the park, and it was late at night. And that park in Berlin is a de facto no-go area where it's dangerous to go through. And so this guy was appalled seeing his daughter walking through the park at this hour of the night. And so he gets mad, and they're arguing, and they're yelling at each other. And he says, she knows she shouldn't go that way. So I said to her, we're going back, so you can understand why you shouldn't do that. Now, this is, of course, insane, because he's angry that his daughter is going through the park in the middle of the night. And so his response, let's go back to the park in the middle of the night. He loses sight of her when he finds her again, a self-fulfilling prophecy. There is a man following her. That man is a Moroccan Muslim migrant named Munir, and he throws a full beer bottle at Thomas. He throws another beer bottle at Thomas. Thomas says, my daughter screamed. The man forced me to my knees and said, that is not your daughter. I shouted to her, run away. Shortly thereafter, a knife flashes in the North African's hand, with which he stabbed the father several times. The father says, I have no idea how I got out of there alive. 2 days later, I woke up in the hospital. But what happened was that the Moroccan said that he had lost his job and was upset, and he got drunk and fell asleep in the park. And when he woke up, he saw this man abusing his daughter. And the Berlin police came, and they saw this guy, Thomas, the German father, all bloody. And they saw this Moroccan next to him, and they embraced and comforted the unharmed man, the Moroccan, thinking that he was the victim of the bloody perpetrator who was passed out on the ground. You follow me here? The police came and saw them both, and they saw this stabbing victim and the man who had stabbed him with the knife in his hand, and they embrace and comfort the guy who stabbed him, thinking he was the victim, because they are so programmed to think that the problem in the world today is right-wing white supremacists, and that they prey on poor migrants from Morocco and thereabouts. And so they went and embraced and comforted the man who had actually done the stabbing.
There's a lot of dumb stuff that came out of Germany over the... Well,
this is one of the dumbest.
As long as there have been Germans, and I'm part German, but as long as there have been Germans, there's been a lot of dumb stuff coming out of Germany. But that is one of the weirdest things
Hmm.
ever. Hey, my daughter just walked out of that park. Let me walk her back in. That's like back in the day when they catch a kid smoking a cigarette. So you're gonna smoke the whole pack now. You're gonna smoke this whole pack, and then of course a kid
Yes.
smokes a whole pack. It's actually smart because a kid smokes a whole pack of cigarettes. He's gonna get really sick, and then it's gonna partly wire his brain like don't ever smoke again because you're gonna feel awful like this. So I guess the idea is. I don't want my daughter going through that park, so I'll just bring her back there, and then all sorts of horrible stuff will happen, and then she'll never disobey me again. And then, of course, you get stabbed a bunch of times, and then cops get mad at you for being stabbed. Germany, man.
I should
Yeah.
say
So
that Munir. I should note that Munir, the Moroccan, was covered in blood, but of course the blood wasn't his. And that may have been why the police assumed he was the victim, but it's also likely that they did because that's what they're taught all the time, that the migrants are persecuted and that it would be terrible and Islamophobic to think that they would do anything. I should note that this is a German news article that I translated for Jihad Watch, and you can find the link there at Jihad Watch and read the German original if you are skeptical about anything in this very bizarre story.
see, those Germans, they all grow up, they grew up reading Grimm's fairy tales, not the watered down versions that we get
Yeah.
from Walt Disney. And then they read Struwelpeter, right? Which is like, hey, you suck your thumb, the guy's going to come and chop your thumbs off and stuff like that. So there's like all these horrible, bloody stories. And so, you see a guy in a park all covered in blood. It's just, that's normal for Germans.
I got another dumb infidel story here out of Germany. This also is reported in the German press. This was in Spiegel. And the German airports are having a lot of staffing problems. They just can't find enough people to work in the German airports. There are a lot of cancellations, a lot of delays, a lot of people very angry in the German airports. And so they've got this great idea. They're going to bring in more Turks to work in the airports.
Smart.
Yeah. Because after all, when has there ever been any problem with Muslims and airports?
Yeah,
Whoever-
I mean, I would just get Al Qaeda. I mean, the reason they turn to terrorism is probably because they can't get good jobs, and so that and climate change, and so you just bring those guys in, and then and hire them for your airports.
Yeah. Yeah.
Problem solved.
Exactly. But at least we know now that we don't have to worry about another world war from Germany.
Yep. But by the way, on that travel note, have you noticed this? I've noticed the same problem over here. The last 3 times I've flown anywhere, a flight has gotten completely canceled, and then back in the day, your flight gets canceled for some reason. You think no problem, they'll just book you on a flight later in the day. But for the last 3 times I've flown anywhere, I go somewhere, and then my flight gets canceled, and they say there are no more flights.
Yep.
And you gotta wait. You gotta wait 2 days to get another flight. It's like, wait, that defeats the purpose. I'm supposed to be there tomorrow morning to record. Anyway, so
Yeah.
pretty rough.
Well, it's all, that's a whole, we'll have to do this week in vaccine and COVID fallout to deal with that.
Black Angel said some German hurt David badly, sensing some resentment.
Oh, is that it?
It's
Is
not-
that why? Yeah, that's what people always say to me. Oh, what? Some Muslim stole your girlfriend? Is that why you oppose jihad terror?
Yeah, no, it's the same. But it's similar, right? With Islam, it's okay. 14 centuries of violence because of all. There's some connection there. I got some problem with this, but with Germany, it's wait a minute. You guys repeatedly just try to take over the entire world. And even though you lose, you do a pretty darn good. You put up one heck of a fight trying to do it, and it just. I mean, it seems like there's something in the water or something like that makes them. Well, we must go out and conquer the world every few decades or something like that. Anyway, it's kind of built into me. Like I'm expecting them here, to start World War III somehow.
Well, you know, David, I think this calls for yet another dumb infidel story out of Germany. 40 criminals, that is, people who were accused of rape, drug trafficking, and terrorism, boarded the evacuation aircraft from Kabul and returned to Germany after they had been deported from Germany in the past for their various crimes. And the Germans said, "Willkommen," and brought them right back in and let them.
Robert, did you see the movie Idiocracy?
No, but the title's good enough.
You should watch it. There's a scene. He's part of an experiment where they like cryogenically freeze him, and he wakes up, a few decades in the future. But everyone is way stupider, way dumber, and he was average, but now he's all of a sudden the smartest man in the world. Anyway, they lock him up and they send him to jail, and he's in this line waiting to go into jail, and then there's a stupid guard there, and he goes to the guard and he goes, "Hey, I'm supposed to be in the line to get out of jail." And the guard goes, "Idiot!" He slaps him and he goes, "Line's over there," and he sends him in the line, and he walks right out. But that sounds like the Germans now.
Yes,
with their sending away terrorists are landing, and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're not on the plane to get off. We're supposed to be on the plane going to Germany."
Yes.
"Oh, you idiots, get on the plane." Wow, Germans, man.
So they just filled out new applications for asylum, and so these guys who've been deported, they're back, and so the Germans will have to deal with them somehow. And no, they've dealt with people in bad ways in the past. Let's hope they don't do that now. I got a dumb infidel story out of France for you, just to balance things out a little bit.
Well, they're the only ones that can really compete with Germany.
Yeah.
As far as I'm not talking about I'm not talking about a war. I mean, Germany will mop mopped the floor with them. But in terms of like dumb infidel stories, that's the Olympics right there. That's France versus Germany. That's the gold and silver.
Yes. And so what we have this week is a burkini story. The burkini is, of course, the full body swimsuit that does not violate the rule that is in the Hadith that a woman must cover everything except her face and hands. And so this is a controversy that is ongoing in France over whether this thing should be allowed or not because of the French principle of laïcité, secularism, that doesn't allow for various kinds of garb that is religious. And of course, the Muslims insist that it ought to be a matter of their personal freedom, that they can wear whatever they want. And I wouldn't care. I'll let people wear whatever they want to the beach. People wear crazy things all over the place nowadays. But what was interesting about this story is the director of a pool named Recrea, and his name is David Lagache. And David Lagache said, "We have to adapt culturally to our evolving society, and thus it is forbidden to ban burkinis." And I thought, well, yes, he would readily say we have to adapt culturally to our evolving society. But nobody ever in France or Germany or anywhere in Western Europe, or in the United States for that matter, says Muslims have to adapt culturally to the society that they are in that is not Muslim. The adaptation is always and everywhere, in every last case, only in one direction. And so in this case, once again, the French have to adapt. That's taken for granted. Muslims have to adapt? Never.
Little color commentary. I was on your website.
Uh-oh.
I was on your website, Jihad Watch. This was probably 12 years ago. I was on your website, and there was something about the burqa on your site. And my oldest son, who was he was 6 or 7 at the time, he's walking by, and he sees me there on the website, and he goes, "Whoa, look at that cool ninja." And,
yep.
But it's funny because I've heard that several times since then. I'd heard that from the Beal, that he had a little cousin or something like that who walked by some women in burqas and goes, "Ninjas!" And he freaked out, right? So people are mentioning Britain. But years ago, I was in a matter of fact, I was with Nabil. It was Nabil and I. We were over there for some debates in London, and we were hanging out with a group of Muslims. And right by Speaker's Corner, there's a road there where like all the signs are like in Arabic now and so on. And so we're walking around there, and there are all these women walking around in burqas and so on. And I turned to one of the Muslim debaters there, and I go, "Hey, if Islam's a religion of peace, how come you guys got so many ninjas?" Right? And he goes, and he turns and he goes, "Why are your churches filled with whores?" And I was like, "Oh God." I mean, I was joking, right?
Yeah.
A little overly sensitive there. Anyway.
Okay, I got another dumb infidel story out of France. This is a really incredibly stupid infidel story.
There's no way it could be dumber than that German park one.
Yeah, this is a good dumb infidel week, really, and this one gives that one a run for its money.
You might have to eventually do a separate show. There's
this
like,
week in
this
dumb
week
infidels.
in Jihad, and then the dumb infidel show or something.
Yes. Okay, what we got here is Samir, who is on trial for narcotics and for carrying a knife. And he says, "I am here to train myself in hatred and terrorism. When I get out, I will kill a lot of people because they are not good. I know how to recognize them. And children of 1.5, 2 years old, because they are innocent, before they are taken by Satan." And so he is challenged about these statements, as you may imagine. And the court asks him to explain. And he says, "I didn't really say all that. I was just angry. I'm not dangerous. Ask my mom." And the judge says to him, "Perhaps you smoke cannabis, sir?" And the guy says, Samir says, "No, hash."
I was just thinking he should say, "No, hashish."
How did you know? How did you know?
I was just thinking that would be a funny response,
So his defense attorney says, yes, these are disturbing remarks, but they were not made in public, and they were not addressed to someone in particular to make him commit a terrorist act. So there is no real offense here. And sure enough, Samir is acquitted.
Well, there you have it.
He's out on the street now.
What could go wrong?
What indeed? No, indeed. I can't imagine anything that could possibly go wrong in such a situation. All right, shall we go to Uganda?
Yeah, get out of Europe.
Yes. In Uganda, the evangelist Sozi Odongo, he was preaching, holding open-air events in eastern Uganda, preaching to Muslims. And a sheikh, a sheikh actually from... Wait a minute, that's a little bit unclear. Okay, never mind. A sheikh, though, came to him and said to him, "Please stop preaching to our people using the Holy Quran, or else you risk your life." So, of course, he kept on because he would cite the Quran and the Hadith at evangelistic events aimed at Muslims in Uganda. And obviously that is something that is very common, and people do it here many times. Of course, I've cited the Quran myself, as you have, tens of thousands of times. But unfortunately, Sozi Odongo was stabbed. Where do you think he was stabbed, David?
Here?
I don't know how you do it. It's incredible, really. But anyway,
I'm like 99-1 with the
Yes.
Robert Show. And that was just the one time when I said Allahu Akbar, and it was actually
yes.
La ilaha illallah.
But that was a story out of Egypt that we talked about, where a Muslim stabbed two Christians because they were selling beer. And there was video that I carried at Jihad Watch where you could see him with the bloody knife and blood all over his shirt, and he very clearly says, La ilaha illallah. After we did the show, however, I came across another news story that I had not seen before the show, in which it said, sure enough, that you were right. He did also say Allahu Akbar.
Even when I'm wrong, I'm still right. So I'm 100 no now.
That's it. The Beatles sang a song about you. I guess that's before your time, but they have a lyric. It really doesn't matter. When I'm wrong, I'm right. And there you are. Okay, so what else do we have here? We have quite a lot, but I want to find some good ones. Oh, in Chicago, Darul Qasim got accredited. You'll be happy to hear. That's a madrasa in the Chicago suburbs, and the Illinois Board of Higher Education has awarded it a license to operate as a college. Darul Qasim is an affiliate of the Deobandis out of India. And the Deobandis, it is useful to know, are the intellectual foundation for the Taliban. And there are Deobandi preachers and Deobandi leaders who have called for the execution of homosexuals and for lashing for premarital sex. So this is not something that I think Chicagoans are necessarily entirely ready for. What possibly could come out of this new Muslim college in Chicago. But we will have to see the quality of the graduates that they present to us in the near future.
Yeah, the sad part is that they will have educated thousands and thousands of people before people realize what's going on.
Indeed.
No, indeed.
No, indeed. Oh, I'm sorry, David. I got to go back to France for this because this is another update. The Imam, yes, the Imam Hassan Iqiyusen. We spoke about him last week. He was actually ordered to be expelled from France. His residence permit was not renewed. And Hassan Iqiyusen was guilty of making anti-Semitic and misogynistic statements. And I thought, well, how naive and stupid are the French authorities to think that this guy is somehow singular in making anti-Semitic and misogynistic statements when you've got the Quran making anti-Semitic and misogynistic statements. But it gets worse, because Hassan Iqiyusen will not be deported. A French court suspended his deportation, and they said that it was a disproportionate attack on his private and family life to penalize him for making these kinds of statements.
And it's a situation where no matter what this guy said, it can't be as bad as what we find in the Quran and the Hadith. And yet, if you criticize it in the Quran and the Hadith, you're the bad guy for criticizing you're the bad guy for pointing it out. But, years ago, this was maybe, 8 years ago or so, but there was, I don't know if you remember, but a bunch of Hollywood actors got together to condemn the Hamas charter, where some Hamas charter, and they condemned Hamas for saying that the end will not come until the Jews are hiding behind trees and rocks, and the trees and rocks are saying, "Here's a Jew behind me." And all these Hollywood celebrities signed this condemnation of Hamas for saying that about the Jews. Whereas anyone who's at all familiar with the Muslim sources was looking at it going, Muhammad said that. They were quoting Muhammad. Hamas quoted Muhammad. But as long as it's Hamas saying it, then everyone can condemn it. As soon as you find out that Muhammad said it, then you're evil and depraved if you have any problem with it. This is so insane.
It is. And actually, around that time, David Horowitz and I ran a campaign asking the major Muslim organizations in the United States to repudiate that hadith on the basis that it was obviously genocidal, and none of them would do it. Most of them simply ignored the request. Horowitz was actually able to get. There was, you may recall, there was a University of Southern California, I believe it was, and they had a very useful, easily searchable database of hadith that was online that they ultimately crippled and then took down altogether. But he prevailed upon them to actually remove those passages from the hadith, and then all these other Muslims protested and said, how can you remove the words of Muhammad? Especially at the behest of some infidel and some Jewish infidel.
It was messed up because they also took out the one. They took out the one where Muhammad said that the sun sets in a pool of water. That's in the hadith. I mean, that's in the Quran.
Yes.
And when you point that out to Muslims, they'll say, no, it's just saying that Dhul Qarnayn saw the sunset and it looked like it was going into a pool. But in the hadith, in Sunan Abu Dawud, which is Sahih, it's a Sahih hadith. Muhammad, there's nothing about anyone seeing something. It's Muhammad asks one of his followers, do you know where the sun goes when it sets? And his follower says, no, you're the prophet. And he says, it sets in a pool of water. And so it refutes the reinterpretation of the Quran because it shows that Muhammad himself was convinced that the sun sets in a pool, and he's the living Quran. He's the best interpreter of the Quran. And so it's just I went to back when they had that database. I went to look at it. I was like, hey, where'd that hadith go? It just skipped it.
Yep. Well, that one, that database is long gone. But there's a very helpful hadith database, slightly less user friendly, but still very good at Sunnah.com. And now that I've said that, they'll probably take that down.
I don't know if you ever. I made a video once. I was cracking up. If you type in pedophile in that search on Sunnah.com. They may have changed it now, but I made a video back in the day. If you search for pedophile and click on it, it goes, did you mean the prophet?
Why, yes. Why, yes, I did.
Yeah.
Okay, more dumb infidels out of Britain. Since we hit Germany and France, we can hit Britain as well. There was a independent office of police conduct, which is supposed to investigate incidences of police misconduct in England and Wales. They were investigating why it was that the Greater Manchester Police dropped its investigation into the Muslim rape gangs. And so this is an investigation of a dropped investigation. They were trying to figure out what led the Greater Manchester Police to stop investigating the Muslim rape gangs. And the Independent Office of Police Conduct has just announced they can't figure it out. It's a total mystery. They don't know why the Greater Manchester Police dropped their investigation into the Muslim rape gangs. And so it's just going to remain a hanging question, a total mystery.
I want to go over there and dress up as Sherlock Holmes and do some sort of skit where I'm trying to figure this out.
That's great. That's great. Because, they are so far gone there that not only does nobody even ever come close to saying, Islam allows for this kind of behavior. Even though a lot of the rapists were quoting the Quran to their victims. And even though the Quran very clearly speaks about the captives of the right hand and all that, nobody in Britain speaks about this. And the closest they come, there was actually an MP, Sarah Champion, who said, hey, have you noticed that a lot of these rape gangs, these grooming gangs, as they call them, they're all Pakistanis? Oh, and it was a big uproar, and she was fired from her position in the shadow cabinet because you're not supposed to notice this. And yet, that's not even the problem. The problem is not that they're Pakistanis. The problem is the Quranic teaching that undergirds this behavior. But that's just absolutely beyond the pale in Britain. Can't talk about it at all.
And it's obviously worse in Britain than it is in certain other parts of the world. But you see the same thing wherever you go. No matter where you go, you see Muslim organizations trying to silence anything that could ultimately lead to an examination of the teachings of the religion. And so, we see an extreme case with the grooming gangs, where thousands and thousands of young British girls were groomed, raped, gang raped, and then pimped, drugged, all that stuff. And the police and social workers knew about it for decades and wouldn't do anything about it because they're terrified of being called Islamophobes. But you have the same thing. And in fact, I mean, it goes right back to how we started off this episode when we're talking about the killings in Albuquerque, where as soon as you find out this is an attack by a Muslim, that these killings were by a Muslim, you have to drop all the investigations into the ideology, and you have to try and deflect away from them. But notice, I mean, what organizations like CARE and so on have been doing for years. Anytime we draw attention to the Islamic teaching that justifies some terrorist attack or some horrible behavior or some crime, as soon as we point that out, they take steps to silence all the criticism, and they're constantly warning everyone about this coming backlash, that if you point out anything that has anything to do with Islam, you're basically going to get Muslims killed. And notice what the end result of that is journalists are terrified to point out anything that has to do with Islam that casts Islam in some negative light. They're terrified of pointing out anything like that because they'll be called Islamophobes. But that's exactly the same thing that led to the grooming gangs getting away with, rape and gang rape and everything, and murder, because sometimes they killed the girls. That led to them getting away with it for decades. It's the exact same thing. This as long as you can intimidate and bully the journalists until they become just wired never to criticize Islam or never to draw attention to anything that has to do with Islam, you can literally get away with rape and murder. Mm-hmm. And yet we stand against that, and we're the bad guys. We're the bad guys because journalists need to do their job and report stuff and not be intimidated and bullied by people who are trying to keep them from getting to the truth.
Another story like that out of Texas, and I really think that we got to get it in here before we're done. That is that Yasser Saeed was finally convicted. Yasser Saeed, of course, I believe we've spoken about this case before in the past. January 1st, 2008, he murdered his daughters, Amina and Sarah, for dating non-Muslims. And he was on the run for 12 years. He was number one on the FBI's most wanted list. He was caught last year or a couple years ago, and he was finally put on trial and finally convicted this week, sentenced to life in prison. And so this is finally a certain kind of closure to this terrible story. But it's worth noting that in 2008, when it first happened, his wife, Patricia Saeed, was on record saying that Yasser was angry with the girls for dating non-Muslims. And of course, Islamic law forbids Muslim women to marry non-Muslim men. And the Dallas Morning News reported that was why they were killed, and other people reported that was why they were killed. It was a matter of public record. But in the coverage of the trial that we have seen this past week, I saw statements to the effect that Yasser was angry with the daughters for dating. That was not true. And that he was angry with the daughters for dating American boys. That was not true, or partially true, but if they had been American Muslims, probably he wouldn't have been so upset. He was upset because they were dating Muslims, but nowadays the papers know you can't say something like that. It's Islamophobic. And so it was not reported. And we heard in the story I saw this morning about the conviction that he was overwhelmingly possessive and controlling. Well, yes, I'm sure he was. But that's not why he killed them. He killed them because they were dating non-Muslims, and that is forbidden in Islamic law. But nobody will discuss that because we cannot go to anything that reflects negatively on Islam in the mainstream discussion.
And one more thing to point out is so this guy was in the United States of America and killed his daughters for becoming westernized and for dating non-Muslim boys. There are places in the world where that would be a valid legal defense.
Mm-hmm.
Like you would walk in there, you would sit before the judge or the jury or whatever the system is, and you would say, these girls were dating non-Muslim boys, so I had to kill them. And the judge or jury would say, you're right. Or, worst case scenario, give you a slap on the wrist or something like that, some punishment. But you'd either get off or you would, there would be a significantly reduced penalty for you because of all the trauma you had to go through as a father, witnessing your daughter doing these things.
Exactly. And there are actually countries in the Middle East, I have a list of them at Jihad Watch when they're honor killing stories, where it's in the absolute legal code that the penalties are lessened if it can be established that it was an honor killing. And so this is not some aberration. This is something that is widely tolerated and accepted in Islamic culture. And I maintain that it goes back to Surah 18, where the mysterious figure who's known in Islamic tradition as Khidr, who's walking around with Moses, and he kills a boy, and Moses asks him, why did you kill him? And he says he was unrighteous, and his parents were righteous. They deserved a better child. That, at very least, it gives a validation to the idea that killing someone who is a child who is unrighteous, and of course the Shafi'i school of Islamic law in Reliance of the Traveler, there's no penalty for a parent who kills a child. So these things are enshrined in Islamic law. This is not the ravings of some crazy person.
And notice, you can easily piece together a pretty airtight justification. You point out, hey, according to Surah 4, verse 65 of the Quran, anyone who doesn't agree with Muhammad's decisions and commands isn't an actual Muslim. And so my daughters, by rejecting the commands of Islam, going against them, were actually demonstrating that they're apostates. And Muhammad said, if anyone leaves his religion, kill him. And you have right there in Sahih al-Bukhari about Muhammad's companions saying that this applies to women as well. And you say, but they're teenage girls. They're senior citizens by an Islamic standard. Right, so they're totally responsible adults according to Islam, and so death penalty. That's all you would have to. If you were in a Sharia court, hey, I put my daughters to death because of their behavior that showed that they were actually apostates. And you have in Sunan Ibn Majah, which says carry out Allah's punishments even against your own family members.
There you go.
Easy justifications.
Okay, out of Greece, there's another similar story. This was a young man named Sunni, who was a Pakistani Muslim migrant to Greece, and he was dating a Greek girl named Nicoletta, 17 years old. And she told him that if he wanted to marry her, he was going to have to become an Orthodox Christian. Whereupon they argued. And in the course of the argument, says Sunni, she insulted the Quran. Whereupon he killed her. Now, it's useful to note that in light of your statements about honor killing a minute ago, David, that I think that it's likely that if he had still been in Pakistan and he went to court and he said, well, I killed her because she insulted the Quran, he would walk. It's not going to happen in Greece. But probably he thought that it would be exculpatory, that's why he killed her.
And notice you find the exact same thing in the Muslim sources. So in Sunan Abu Dawud, there's that story about the man who killed his slave girl, who was also the father of two, I mean, who was also the mother of two of his children, because you can have sex with your slave girls. And so they find this slave girl dead, covered in blood. And Muhammad says, all right, whoever did this, you need to come forward. The man comes forward and says, she was insulting you. I told her to stop. And so she wouldn't stop. So I had to kill her. Muhammad said, there's no retaliation for her blood. So no punishment for this guy. And I mean, the terrifying part is there's this man and his slave girl. The only person who knew what happened there was the guy, right? Because the woman's dead. She was killed. So the only person who knows what happened there is the guy. And he says, she said a bunch of mean stuff about you, Muhammad, so I killed her. And Muhammad said, okay, you get a free pass then. Notice, he could have killed her for anything and just made up a story, right? He could have killed her because, she looked at another guy or something like this, or she messed up his falafel. Could be anything. And he could have killed her. And then, hey, why'd you kill her? Oh, she insulted Muhammad. And you've just got an airtight defense there, because how is anyone going to know what someone said? So notice the precedent that sets up. You can just slaughter your wife. You can slaughter your daughter. You can slaughter anyone you want behind closed doors. And yet, Islamically speaking, all you have to do is say, but she said a bunch of mean stuff about Muhammad. And you see the impact that has had on places like you mentioned in Pakistan, where it's you don't like someone, you just make, this person said a bunch of mean stuff about Muhammad. A mob will form and they'll beat the guy to the death in the streets.
Exactly. In a similar vein, Switzerland. In Switzerland, there was a young woman in the canton of Vaud who was dating a 30-year-old Afghan Muslim migrant. And he was unfortunately had to be apart from her for long periods. She worked elsewhere, apparently. And so he said to her one time on the phone, I will kill you and marry your corpse if I have to. Now that's one thing. But another thing he said to her was, you must wear the chador. You have to submit to me. Otherwise I'll kill you and nobody will catch me. And I think that's probably true. Or at least it would have been true in Afghanistan. Nobody would even care. But in Switzerland, it might be that the authorities would be so afraid of being Islamophobic that he would get away with it relatively easily. In any case...
You could even kind of justify what that creep said. There's that story. I don't know the grading or anything, but it's from Kansal Umal, where a woman died and Ali was all sad because she's going to go to hell, and Muhammad crawls down into the grave with her and says, "Don't worry, I'll sleep with her." But it's like our word for sleep, in that it can refer to sex, or it can just be I slept there. But the idea was that by Muhammad sleeping with her, again, whether that's sex with the dead body or not, that she would be one of Muhammad's wives, and therefore she would be granted paradise. And so I don't know if the guy was thinking about that when he said that, I'll marry your corpse, but yeah, so maybe I'll marry your corpse and then I'll get you in paradise because you'll be one of my wives. But
that could very well be. All right, one more. Let's conclude with Mozambique. And Mozambique, we have a statement from the Islamic State, from ISIS, after they killed 2 people in an attack on a minibus in Cabo Delgado, where they control the area. They announced, by the grace of Allah Almighty, the soldiers of the Caliphate killed 2 Christians, beheading them and shooting them with their weapons. I'm not sure why they thought it was necessary to shoot them after they had beheaded them, but this is not a logical religion. In any case, I thought it was interesting that they noted that it was by the grace of Allah that they beheaded the two Christians. And it's worth noting that, of course, the Quran repeatedly says to behead the unbelievers, 47:4, 8:12, and so on. And thus, it's a sacred act if you do it. It's not something that Allah is allowing. It's something that Allah is actively commanding and thus will bless.
Yep, and 14 centuries of this, we're still not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, we're not allowed to talk about it. It's a funny thing, actually. I'll conclude with this. Somebody was emailing me the other day asking me about that when I wrote the history of jihad in 2018, where did I find the denial starting? And how long does it go back that you have non-Muslims being killed and then saying, oh, this isn't really Islam? But that's actually, I found that's a 20th century phenomenon. It really did start around the 1960s and 70s, and it just goes up, gathers steam from there. And you can see that in the history of jihad. Anyway, David Wood, thank you very much. And I am Robert Spencer. This is This Week in Jihad. And unfortunately, I believe we will likely be back next week, as there is likely to be more jihad. So thank you very much for being here. And until then, how do you turn this off, David? Oh, there it is. Finish. Okay. Thank you very much, and good evening.